Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to the Keystone Symposium today. My name is Lincoln Alex MacVeagh. I am studying History and French Studies in the College of Arts and Sciences, and today I will be discussing with all of you how 9/11 and the George Bush years altered the evangelical perception of the American state and Islam. When George Bush proclaimed in the aftermath of 9/11 that Islam is peace, he was chastising his largest group of supporters, American evangelicals. The American evangelical community is one of the largest yet most amorphous religious groups in the United States. Up to 35% of Americans can self-identify as evangelical, depending on the specific definition used. This group has tremendous power to shape American culture and politics, and during the Bush years between 2001 and 2008, this power was especially visible. Perhaps the most visible cultural product of evangelicals were responses to 9/11. The terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 shocked American evangelicals to their core, forcing them to reconcile their Christian identity with a foreign, challenging, and evangelizing faith, Islam. Historically, America has been a Christian nation. We are here today in the city on the hill, where Puritans displayed their covenant with God for all the world to see. In the 19th century, evangelical revivals swept through the land, and in the 20th century, millions of Americans followed televangelists such as Billy Graham in becoming born-again Christians. Our national motto is "In God We Trust," and for hundreds of years, that God has been assumed to be Christian. That America is Christian, specifically Judeo-Christian, was established kind of firmly during the Second World War. Evangelicals were horrified by the horrors of Nazi Germany and the purportedly Christian Nazi regime, and sought to differentiate themselves by mainstreaming the rhetorical term Judeo-Christian America. Following the Second World War, a new existential opponent of the United States emerged, the Soviet Union. As a representative of worldwide atheistic communism, the USSR challenged the two institutions held most dear by American evangelicals: Christianity and the American state. Once again, the two were aligned alongside Judaism, and Judeo-Christian America became the rhetorical opponent of worldwide atheistic communism. With the fall of the Soviet Union in the 1990s, evangelicals and Americans explored a cultural dominance unchallenged by any single institution. As such, they were able to relax the alliances of religion and state which had characterized much of the 20th century. The Judaic elements of Judeo-Christian America were exported to the state of Israel, and evangelicals saw the nation of Israel and the Jewish people as becoming an entity in and of themselves, separate from the now Christian America. And even within the United States, religion and state connections were relaxed. All this changed on September 11th, 2001. September 11 catapulted Islam into the forefront of American evangelical consciousness. Although Americans had considered Islam in both a geopolitical and eschatological mindset for hundreds of years. Historian Thomas Kidd outlines a brilliant history of evangelical thought on Islam in his book, American Christians and Islam. Writing in 2009, Kidd argued that much of the volume of evangelical critiques of Islam after 9/11 were unprecedented. However, their content was not actually anything new. They were repeating themes and ideas which had been present throughout American history. I agree with Kidd. Evangelicals said nothing new after 9/11. Instead, they looked back to a rhetoric which had defended them throughout the 20th century. They looked back to the rhetoric of Christian America. Historians such as Harvard professor of comparative religion Diana Eck have argued that Christian America is a thing of the past. Even Kidd himself argued that we were moving towards a more inclusive Abrahamic language. However, I suggest that evangelicals and evangelical periodicals continued to associate Islam with Christian America's two greatest enemies, Nazi Germany and the communist Soviet Union. For my Keystone, I explored how two evangelical periodicals, the Baptist Standard and Christianity Today, discussed Islam in the over 400 articles mentioning the religion published throughout the Bush years. Both publications are inherently evangelical, with the Standard serving specifically Texas Baptists, while Christianity Today served a more ecumenical population across various denominations. Both were highly visible, with circulations in or around the hundreds of thousands at this time, and as such had a tremendous power to shape evangelical groupthink. Most of the articles I examined were polemic, typically falling into one of three categories. Some argued that Islam was inherently false, while Christianity offered true salvation. Others argued Islam was inherently violent, while Christianity taught peace. And some, which scholars have far too long overlooked, villainize Islam by associating the religion with communism and fascism. Articles with very lurid titles such as "Crushed by a Soviet Relic" or "Author Links Saudi Brand of Islam to Worldwide Violence" highlight the ways in which these periodicals villainize the religion. Both the Standard and Christianity Today utilize rhetorical calls for a Christian America, as well as direct assertions that realigning American public policy interests with Christian values would aid geopolitical interests. Now, you may be wondering exactly how does this documented rise of Islamophobia and calls for a Christian America affect us today? Evangelicals, although being a slightly smaller population than they were in 2008, are still a significant voter bloc. In the 2004 election, in which Bush won his second term, there is the perception internationally that evangelicals won the vote for Bush. Similarly, in 2008, the belief that Barack Obama's spiritual journey aligned with evangelical expectations was a significant motivating factor behind the evangelical votes Obama received. Even today, the evangelical understanding that America should and can realign itself with Christian values is important for making political decisions. Donald Trump has been described as the most pro-life, pro-religious liberty, pro-Israel president in the history of our great country, and his pardoning of Alice Johnson has been compared to God pardoning sin through Christ. Understanding that how evangelicals react to geopolitical events is structured on their understanding that America is a Christian nation is vital for understanding and interpreting America's reactions to political and cultural events. While many of us today view America as very separated from religion and cherish the separation of church and state, which is one of the fundamental principles of America, it is vital to understand that in times of crisis, evangelicals believe we are, should be, and always will a Christian America, will be a Christian America. Thank you.
Thanks, Lincoln. So as somebody who was in Central Texas around this time, I know Bush was self-described as a born-again Christian, and was also in Central Texas, which is the home of Baylor, the other BU, sort of the buckle on the Baptist belt. Can you talk about the reaction? You mentioned in your opening statements that he was scolding his base. What was their reaction to him making that pronouncement that Islam is peace?
There were, as you might expect, mixed reactions. Bush was very much an evangelical figurehead, and his statements on Islam were very much not representative of kind of general evangelical thought at the time. It is my understanding that a lot of evangelicals viewed those statements as political maneuvering, and interpreted them with the understanding that he is required to make those statements as a face of American, as the face of America. However, within evangelical, culturally dominated evangelical spaces, such as periodicals or possibly even the classrooms at Baylor or other evangelical institutions, those statements were not considered to be theologically or historically sound.
Alex, could you talk a little bit about the discourse of fascism in your work?
Yeah, the discourse of fascism is incredibly complicated. As we know, as we see almost every day in the news, this or that person or policy is being labeled as fascist. And while one of the complications I found with engaging with the rhetoric of Islamofascism, which was one of the buzzwords that came to dominate evangelical publications, is the use of fascist as a smear term. However, a lot of the rhetoric which I encountered went beyond simply using the terminology fascist and compared the policies of various Islamic states regarding Israel and regarding the Jews to Hitler and the Holocaust, and inherited that kind of image of the main opponent of the Jews, which is something which Islam and previously the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany had in apocalyptic thought of evangelicals. So as much as fascist has kind of lost a lot of meaning in the way it's used today, within evangelical periodicals, the term fascist carried a lot of weight with regards to apocalyptic thought, and statements such as one very famous commentator said that what Hitler did to the Jews was bad, but what the Muslims want to do to the Jews is worse. Statements like that draw on a very specific historical and racist perception and legacy of fascism.
Thank you, Alex. I'm wondering if any of the journals you looked at talk about the war on terror in particular, and what the attitudes were on the war on terror from the journals.
Yeah, that's a great question. As you might imagine, the war on terror was very prominent in all discourse on American Islamic relations, and specifically evangelical relations. It would be very hard. You could write an entire Keystone on the evangelical perceptions of the war on terror, but some kind of general trends were fervent support of it, especially in the aftermath of 9/11. There was a lot of debate on exactly how it could be justified within Christian rhetoric. There's a very strong tradition of just war theory, which any IR people in the room might be familiar with. And actually with the war on terror specifically, you see a evolution of evangelical thought from kind of blind support of it in the immediate aftermath of 2001 to a questioning and a reconsideration of whether America was justified in going to war in Iraq or Afghanistan. The statements made by several prominent evangelicals in the military, such as General William Jerry Boykin, really characterized how evangelicals reacted when he said statements along the lines of, "It is a religious war. We are a Christian nation with a Christian army." That was very indicative of evangelical responses in the immediate aftermath, but as you get into Bush's second term, that dies down, and there's a lot of regret and kind of questioning of the choices in the war on terror, and specifically the war in Iraq. Thank you all for your time.